In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Marvel made some terrible, horrible, unwatchable movies. And I love them. And so can you. Welcome to the end all of awful epics, the original Marvel Trilogy. What follows is a compilation of my 3 videos on these 3 films, presented with added me in the order that I discovered them as a kid. First up, Captain America. I actually love this intro, as in my intro, because I sort of got creative by chance. I wrote this as a script in a scene so that I could film it like a movie, but I didn't have the time or resources. I didn't have a video store. Maybe I could have used Penny as a fill-in for me. But what I did was I thought, oh, I can present it as if typing that screenplay. And it worked, and it was fun to do something a little bit different for the intros, which I tried to do a little bit more here and there with some of these more well-produced videos, relative for me. Interior, all our video. Sometime in the early 90s, a chubby little boy with a mushroom haircut, 10, with a Toy Biz action figure in one hand and a $5 bill in the other, stands before the video rack. He is Josiah. He is awesome. But as we'll come to learn, not the brightest. Mom, sweet but firm. Hurry up, please. Josiah can't move. Slowly, with a trembling hand, he reaches for a VHS sleeve. It's self-sheathed in plastic. He doesn't bother to grab the case, but the laminated tag, noting the movie's title and shelf number. The title, prominently displayed in the glorious VHS sleeve, reads, Captain America. This is pretty much a true story, although my mom probably didn't tell me to hurry up, please. But also that our first video store was Christoph's Video Magic, which is owned by a cousin of my dad, and we kind of grew up with their family, and we would get free rentals and free Nintendo games back in the day too. It was pretty awesome. But then Oliver Video came later, and Oliver Video was the video store of record when I found this movie, and later on when I was a paperboy, Oliver Video was the video store I would go to. It then later became something else, and then it eventually died. My mind was blown when I discovered there was a Captain America live action feature film. I'd seen the 1970s TV movies, and while I liked them, even I felt disappointed with those. I mean, what's the deal with the costume? That version does have a special place in my heart. Dude, a van with a motorcycle in the back? Win-win. Enough of my personal, albeit fictionalized background. Let's take a look at the real background of that actual Captain America feature live action film. The film was developed by the infamous Cannon Films.
Cannon Films and Weird Dynamite.
Cannon famously tried to get a Spider-Man film made.
Spider-Man, the movie, a live action spectacular.
You can trace a zigging, zagging, indirect line from Cannon's incarnation through various legal battles to the Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi version. They also optioned the rights to Superman and somehow managed to make a movie worse than Superman 3.
The quest for peace.
In a sense, Cannon was ahead of the game, as they saw something in these characters, but they somehow also clearly didn't get it. At one point they were working on a Spider-Man movie with a $20 million budget, but Masters of the Universe and Superman 4 took most of their resources, and Spidey's budget was cut to just $7 million. Getting back to Captain America, it was erroneously promoted by Cannon that Captain America was created by Stan Lee. There's certainly plenty of controversy about creating/co-creating with Stan Lee, but Stan would never take credit for a Jack Kirby, Joe Simon creation that occurred before he was truly even in the business. The script was actually called Bloody Awful by then president of Marvel Entertainment, Jim Gouton, and included a draft co-written by Michael Winner, the director of Death Wish, which is essentially Charles Bronson as the Punisher. So apparently Winner was also on board to direct in 1986.
Directed by Michael Winner.
Actor Ronnie Cox, who played President Kimball in the film, told me that the script was brilliant. It was serious, but tongue-in-cheek, with clever moments such as Cap's reaction to seeing a Volkswagen in New York City. So I spoke with actor Ronnie Cox on the phone for about an hour on a Sunday morning, and unfortunately, I screwed up and didn't record anything, but he covered his entire career, this movie in detail, and as much as he could remember, and it was awesome. But again, I screwed up the recording. Also, Cannon had a tendency to over-promote movies well before they were close to being made.
America's favorite superhero explodes onto the screen, waging a war on today's criminals. Canon Films presents a live-action version of Captain America.
The rights were dragged through the mud along with those to Spider-Man, and was actually made by Canon 2, aka 21st Century, which is totally supposed to make you think you're watching some better version of 20th Century Fox. You're not. '21st Century needed money. Batman was the biggest movie of 1989, so director Albert Pyun suggested a comic book film of their own. The rights to Captain America carried over when 21st Century was formed. The Spider-Man rights, on the other hand, began their spider web of legal complexity. To finance Captain America, the filmmakers traveled around Europe with a suitcase that was loaded with cash by investors to keep the struggling production afloat. The situation was so dire near the end that in order to avoid production being shut down, they spent days shooting without film. They'd say, "Oh no, the film must have been destroyed in the lab." Then they'd scrap together what film they were able to and would shoot what they could the next day. The result? There was stuff they were never able to shoot. I asked Ronnie Cox about this, and he said he wasn't aware of it, so I guess the filmmakers did a good job of hiding it from the cast. But they never quit despite insurmountable odds, and finished the film. Well, most of it. And as messy as it is, that is impressive. Now let's take a look at what they did shoot. The film opens in Italy, because why would a Captain America movie start anywhere else? We even get the Captain America logo over some Italian kids. These Italian kids are a useless transition device to show us a boy playing piano. The boy is taken because he's smart. His family is killed, and spoiler alert, lots of spoilers in this, by the way, this is all spoilers. He'll become the Red Skull. Yes, the Red Skull is Italian. Also, there's a Red Skull rat. This shows the difference from the original script that Ronnie Cox said he loved to the director's version. The director put much more of an emphasis on the Red Skull. Clearly too much of a Red Skull emphasis. This is a Captain America movie after all. And again, spoilers will be completely constant from here on out. 7 years later, and 5 minutes into the film, the first words of English are spoken as we learn of Project Rebirth, a process to create a super soldier that is specific to someone born with a birth defect and will make them as strong as an athlete. That's it. An athlete, not a super athlete or superhero or anything, just an athlete. Oh well, Captain America's about to show up. I'm sure things will get much better. Cut to Redondo Beach, California, where Steve Rogers is on vacation from New York. Only the first half of that sentence is true. In this film, Steve is from Redondo Beach. It's clearly a choice made out of cheapness. Filming in New York is expensive after all. Steve talks to his mom, who I swear is younger than him and I really thought was Kate Capshaw, but it's actually Ralphie's mom.
Hey, hold it.
Steve then goes to find his girl Bernie. They all seem pretty confident that Steve is gonna die. And one more super weird thing about this movie, Steve Rogers is played by Matt Salinger, the actual son of Catcher in the Rye author J.D. Salinger. I guess his family legacy will help sell this movie? And he smokes. Captain California smokes. Now I get it, 1943, it's different times, but this movie was made in the late 1980s. When I was a kid in the late 1980s, that wasn't cool. Smoking was bad. There were like afternoon specials about it. In a lab hidden under a diner, actually a cool scene where the kid from Lost in Space goes in and through a secret door, Captain America is made Captain America by a female Italian doctor. Another unnecessary change, but this one I actually like for some reason. After shots of muscles not getting any bigger and flashing lights, a Nazi brought in by the Lost in Space kid kills the doc and shoots Cap. Cap will get shot a lot in this movie. Cap kills the guy basically by knocking him down. Before the first mission, there's actually a nice joke about the costume. Having been made by the doc, the suit is fireproof, and while she didn't make it with camouflage in mind,
but she sure did love the red, white, and blue.
Cap attempts to sneak up on the super death rocket and is instantly discovered. Cap fights a Red Skull, loses handily, and is strapped to the rocket. The rocket launches and Cap grabs Red Skull's arm. Red Skull, who could have just as easily stabbed or cut off Cap's hand, cuts off his own hand. As a kid, I thought it was awesome, and frankly, I still kind of do. The rocket, which was shot from Germany, is nearing the White House when Cap finally decides to redirect it. It crash lands in Alaska and Cap freezes to death. Well, not to death. All told, that was about 25 minutes of film. And while I'm kind of ragging on it, it actually kind of works really well. You get character, you get action, and things move along. And while the costume isn't bad, at least it's comics accurate. Granted, the plastic ears are insane, but I really didn't notice them, and Red Skull looks cool by 1990s C-movie standards. However, there is still an hour left, and that hour is an absolute slog, so I'm gonna move a little bit quicker from here on out. We meet two super annoying kids. No, not me, but one will become Ned Beatty and one President Ronnie Cox. The adult versions of these two fellows are the best things about this movie. A quick but related aside about these two actors. They actually knew each other going back to 1963 at the Arena stage in Washington, D.C. They would later both go on to be cast in Deliverance, and even though they'd been friends for a decade, each was cast totally without knowledge of the other being cast. Returning to the movie, we get some classic meta-Marvel references to Submariner and the Human Torch.
Okay, so it wasn't Submariner and it couldn't have been Human Torch.
Even in their worst movies, Marvel proved to be ahead of the game, showing there was a bigger world than just what we see in this one film. We then transition to the 1990s through spinning newspapers as we learn the bullet points of American history. Then, Cap thaws out and is constantly chased through the movie. He eventually gets to Redondo Beach, where Bernie's moved on, it's been like 50 years, and is now wearing bad old age makeup. Good news though, she's murdered and has a hot young blonde 90s daughter who looks identical to Bernie from the 1940s. Her name is Sharon, which maybe I guess is a reference to Sharon Carter? In LA, where some punks asked Cap for a cigarette, the dude was smoking when he left. Cap laments his lost years as the words to a song that's a bit on the nose plays.
Trying to remember what I just can't forget. Feel like a stranger in my hometown. I look around for a familiar face. Is there anyone still around? I'm still searching, trying to remember all these memories of you.
Cap and Sharon return to the diner, and in my favorite background detail, it's next to a Del Taco. Del Taco is like my favorite thing about California. I know it's terrible, but when I moved here, I'd never experienced Del Taco. It's great for fast food. Temper your expectations, but for fast food, it's just wonderful. Well, you know, it's Del Taco. So true. And I had a gag planned where I was gonna eat Del Taco, but I forgot about it when I came out here to the garage. Earlier, everyone says how the doctor only had the info in her head, yet they go to the lab, open her top desk drawer, and immediately find a book with all the information they need. While Cap is killing Italians in the shadowy smoking lab saying, "This was for Bernie and that was for Bernie," the president is kidnapped. The news tells us about 30 people stormed his hotel. Now that sounds awesome, only that kind of awesome also sounds expensive. 30 people storming a hotel? Pretty cool Captain America movie, right? Right? Yeah. I'm sure the scene in the script was awesome. Maybe they shot it without filming the camera? I specifically asked Ronnie Cox about this, and he doesn't recall if there was some epic action sequence here, but he reiterated that there was a lot in the script that didn't make it to film. In Italy, Cap pretends to be sick to get Sharon to pull over. She does. He steals the car.
What are you doing? Wait a minute, what are you doing?
Now, I didn't mention it the first time, but this is the second time he does this exact same thing. Earlier, in Alaska or Canada, wherever it was, he did just that to Ned Beatty. Despite the fact that Cap had the car, Sharon immediately shows up.
John, though.
They then get a tape of Red Skull's origin. It comes up later, but it's really kind of pointless because it doesn't actually impact the Red Skull in any kind of significant way whatsoever. And also, I failed to mention this as well, but Red Skull is now just a creepy old Italian dude with a regular-ish face. I guess he paid for plastic surgery while monopolizing global power. Sharon is captured. Cap is chased some more. The president uses acid to escape, and eventually the movie drags you to a climax, when the cornered president decides to kill himself. It's an awesome moment, actually. I love that President Ronnie Cox is a true action hero. Probably the truest action hero in this movie.
Then you can't win.
Cap catches him and they fight their way through the only cool set in this movie, the overused Italian castle, which is in Dubrovnik in then Yugoslavia, now Croatia, where we actually have distant relatives. Also, it just occurred to me, this is really not a Captain America movie, but a Red Skull movie. He's the more interesting character here, and he kind of has more of a character arc. Which was a change by the director. Again, he was enamored with the Red Skull, and casting Matt Salinger, who wasn't particularly great, though I'd say he's very likable in the role, helped assure this was more Red Skull movie and less a Captain America one. Anyway, Red Skull has some totally unexplained doomsday device, and Cap uses his shield to knock a dummy off the side of the castle. To end the movie, Cap jams his face at you. Really, we get another image of Cap, different from the face jam one, and it transitions to a comic book Cap over the credits. I think it's there to taunt you as another one of those on-the-nose songs plays.
Gotta keep it going now. The already bright and blue.
There's a whole lot wrong with this movie, but I still kind of love it. Not kind of, I just plain love it. I realize it's an utterly broken disaster of a movie, but I'll never forget my trembling hand in that Oliver video, taking it home and watching it several times. I love that movie. It absolutely doesn't hold up, but it's worth watching, if only for the sake of irony. This is where Marvel began. As shaky and crumbly as the foundations were, this is one of the earliest Marvel movies. And this is part of a series. We're going to talk about some other very early Marvel movies. So coming up next, The Punisher, starring Dolph Lundgren. Wait, what? Why? Thanks for watching! Finally, a huge thanks to Ronnie Cox, who spoke with me on the phone about this film and his career in general. I can't say enough to express my gratitude to him, giving me 40 minutes of his time on a Sunday morning.
Mr. President! Thanks.
Trying to remember what I just can't forget. Feel like a stranger in my hometown. I look around for a familiar face. Is there anyone still around?
Now, onto The Punisher, and another elaborate, kind of creative intro. And in this one, I shot it at our old townhome in Anaheim, which we moved away from 6 months ago. And they were still building part of the community there, so I had sort of a good construction scene, back alley looking place to film things, and actually put the camera on a dolly to roll it forward towards my own copy of The Punisher on VHS. Take yourself back to the early 1990s, the glory days of the home video store, the glory days of the local video store, before Blockbuster killed them all, and before, in the ultimate twist ending, Netflix wiped them from existence. It may have been a video store or a dark alley. There was a movie. It featured the coolest comic character 8-year-old Josiah had ever seen. It was R-rated. So of course, Mom rented it. A character so gritty, so real, and packing so much heat a boy raised on G.I. Joe couldn't resist. It was The Punisher. 100% true. My mom and I even watched it together. Also, the shooting sounds and the graphics are from the LJN Punisher game, which is probably the best LJN game ever made, maybe. Its competition's a pretty low bar. Remember, it is an R-rated movie, so the little ones should cover their eyes. Also, cover them from Cap firing toys. I actually have that Punisher. It's in a box over there. There's a lot of boxes since we've moved and I still haven't gone through. And frankly, I forgot I had it when I did the original video about the Punisher. I was gonna have Penny playing with a Cap firing toy. Maybe it's best that I didn't open that one up. Just a bit of global context, and by global, I mean the Marvel Universe. Maybe I should say intergalactic context? In 1986, New World Entertainment acquired Marvel Comics. One of the big muckety-mucks of New World actually said to a colleague, thinking they purchased DC, "We just bought Superman!" Like Michael Scott doing voices. And thinking they'd purchase DC. Hey, we own Superman.
This is the worst.
This is actually one of my first jokes that came from the editing, and it's something that I'm trying to do more and more. It's a cool, unique way to hopefully add humor and maybe more context through clips that I find kind of after the fact of writing my script. Only to be informed they actually bought Spider-Man and didn't actually have the movie rights to Spider-Man. The more things change, the more they stay the same. New World wasn't interested in comic books, but intellectual properties. Stan Lee, ever the huckster, was thrilled with the possibilities in Hollywood. He could finally get beyond just funny books. Stan had already been in Hollywood for years, and his main involvement with Marvel was actually about getting television shows and movies made. While some TV shows were made, only The Incredible Hulk could be considered a real success. Success, or frankly even failure at the movies, hadn't happened at all. They didn't even have a chance to fail. But Stan was sure, with New World, it was gonna happen. Well, hopefully success would happen, but it was gonna happen theatrically. As noted in Sean Howe's Marvel Comics The Untold Story, Stan shared his joy with his readers. The young, hip, fun-loving guys who run New World dig Marvel Comics as much as you do. That's why they bought us. That's why they want to make some real dynamite movies and TV shows based on all of your favorite characters. Keep in mind, this was the 1980s. I was born in the 1980s, I grew up then. And I remember that we talked like this. Stan and his New World overlords wanted to make movies. Enter recent film school graduate Boaz Yakin. He approached New World with a script for The Punisher. A script the inexperienced filmmaker had written in 10 days. Hey, who needs more than 10 days when it's perfect, right? New World wanted B and C level Marvel characters from which they could produce cheap action movies. If that doesn't scream Punisher, I don't know what does. For me, this part hammers home that Punisher is totally Death Wish, which I loved as a kid but probably shouldn't have. Both came in 1974. Punisher came first, kind of, but not really. At least first in 1974. Let me explain. Punisher first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man 129 cover dated February 1974, so it's possible it could have hit newsstands in late 1973. Death Wish was released on July 24th, 1974, although it was based on Brian Garfield's 1972 novel. So I guess Death Wish came first after all. Interestingly, the film was shot in the winter of 1973 into 74, the very time Punisher first appeared in the real-life home of Marvel, New York City, set in the fictionalized version of the same city. We have some crazy levels of unintentional meta-ness here. Marvel is meta sometimes by sheer coincidence. Death Wish director Michael Winter also very nearly directed Captain America for Canon Films, who produced several of the many Death Wish sequels. In 1986, the year of the New World acquisition of Marvel, The Punisher finally received his first miniseries. While The Punisher probably accurately reflected 70s cinema and the grittiness you could see there, he was really ahead of his time in terms of comic book characters. 70s Marvel was still kinda stuck in the 60s, and yet way too 70s. By the 80s, DC had found a way to lean into the gritty dark side of their characters, with The Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen. Albeit, those were outside of the main continuity. Marvel tried with significantly less success. The New Universe, anyone? But set in Pittsburgh, so I'm definitely a fan. Within mainstream Marvel, Wolverine and the Punisher were the equivalent of 80s action heroes in movies. The age of John Rambo and RoboCop, which both weirdly had kids shows. The latter was even produced by Marvel. Wolverine first dipped his claw into more realistic waters with his 1984 miniseries. The miniseries by Frank Miller and Chris Claremont. The Punisher didn't get his previously mentioned 4-issue miniseries until 1986, a 4-issue series that turned out to be 5 issues. While Frank's miniseries came 4 years after Logan's, Mr. Castle was the first to get an ongoing series in 1987. Even Mr. Logan didn't get one until 1988, and that was only a kinda sort of got his own comic situation with shared billing. Regardless, by the early 1990s they both have like 90 million comics featuring them, sometimes together. The film was originally slated for a 1989 theatrical release. That never happened, at least not in the US. Now this is where things get a little bit tricky, so bear with me as I do my best to sort it out. In 1970, New World Pictures was actually founded by Roger Corman and his brother Gene. Roger Corman will come up in a future video. As you probably know, he has a bizarre connection to the most infamous Marvel feature ever made, but that's not this story. After the Cormans gave Jonathan Demme, Joe Dante, and others their start at New World, they sold the company in 1983. A few years later, New World then acquired Marvel Entertainment from its parent company, Cadence Industries, which sounds like they would make chemicals that result in the Joker, but that's the wrong comic book universe. The following year, they changed their company name to the more broad New World Entertainment. In January 1989, New World Entertainment sold Marvel to Ron Perlman and his crew, but they didn't sell Marvel Productions. New World merged Marvel Productions with their own production company. Apparently, New World wasn't doing well financially, and what was left of it was purchased by Perlman in April. In 1990, the rights to this film were sold to Live Entertainment, and a lot of other Marvel properties were just sold off. I think. What I do know is, the film was released in Germany on October 5th, 1989, and was screened in LA at a sci-fi convention in 1990, and was finally released on VHS in 1991, which is where I come into the story.
I am the Punisher. My family is truly killed!
You can watch the whole unedited version of my Punisher film on my retro channel, Retroberg. So Mom and I just got home from the video store. We pop in that VHS, adjust the tracking. Yes, adjust the tracking because this was before at least we had automatic tracking. And we're off to the world of Punisher. And we're also off to the point where spoilers begin. The film opens with what I assume are a series of gun barrels with 1970s quality graphics. And remember, this is almost the 1990s. But it's the low budget almost 1990s. The very low budget. We quickly get the context of the Punisher's trauma. We are then greeted by the Punisher. All of the Punisher. They really leaned into the R rating here. From behind. You see Dolph's shadowy nakedness in his sewer hideout. My favorite aspect of this movie, without a doubt, without any real competition from anything else being awesome, there's a few things here and there, but it is clearly the Punisher having a sewer lair. That, my friend, is awesome. One glorious Christmas, I got the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles version, and you know my Toy Biz Punisher cracked a few turtle shells and moved on in. The action of the film begins as the Punisher, who already has a kill count of over 100, blows up a house with mobsters in it, in broad daylight, in front of the media. Mom, why did you let me watch this? That's a real question, Mom. Answer in the comments below. Our basic plot is thus: Frank Castle is dead, or so the police tell the media. In reality, Frank is killing mob dudes, seeking revenge for his family's murder, just like in the comics. The Japanese then enter the drugs and murder picture. In this movie universe, the Japanese are the most evil of bad guys. Akira is not cool with that. Meanwhile, Louis Gossett Jr., who is the backbone of this movie and brings in some real credibility, is Frank's former partner. I'm genuinely a big fan of Dolph Lundgren and think he's good as He-Man. Watch my podcast with my friend Brian about that whole movie. However, he doesn't really bring the credibility to play an Italian-American New Yorker. Louis Gossett Jr. knows Frank is out there, and with his new lady partner, sets out to find him.
It was my first assignment, plainclothes. I was the hooker.
Oh, right.
She's full of gumption, so she'll definitely find Frank and probably fall in love with him. I seriously don't remember if she does. Let's find out together. The movie has lots of guns and lots of mobsters dying. Oh, and Frank has a drunk actor sidekick informant who uses a remote control car with booze on it to lure him into an alley. Sounds like something Micro would do. The luring part, not the boozing part. Why didn't they just make that guy Micro? To be fair, Micro was a pretty recent invention at that point. The movie affirms its controversial opinion that the Japanese are the evilest of evil when they attack the drug-peddling Italians at the dock. It's actually a good scene and probably the best scene in the film, and thinking about it, yeah, it probably is the best scene in this film. I regret calling it a film a second ago. Please forgive me, Lawrence of Arabia. The scene in this movie is confusing and chaotic as Punisher shows up and finds himself saved by chance in the chaos. And there's really no difference between a film and a movie, it's just words for a joke. Back to the film/movie and back in the sewer, Punisher cauterizes his wounds with a knife. Reverting to my childhood self, I can't help but be impressed by that. This wooden knife, my dad made for me as a kid, and I'm sure I imagine myself cauterizing all kinds of wounds with this thing. It's wooden, so it won't cut. What is in my hair? Is that a wood chip? Dolph does look like a deeply wounded soul with those dark sunken eyes, but the hair dye doesn't help, and frankly, I think Dolph's more charming than this. Just watch He-Man. By the way, how was Dolph Lundgren? Two icons of my childhood, of all people. Good for you, Dolph, but really? Ivan Drago? I love him as He-Man, and even now when I rewatch it. However, his lack of acting chops, at least in this point of his career, hurt the potential of the deeply wounded soul that is the Punisher. Returning to the plot, Punisher is confronted by the reality of his kill spree opening the door for the Japanese to come in and kidnap the Italian mobster's kids. Shades of Joker and the Mob in The Dark Knight. I think Christopher Nolan watched himself some Punisher. Here we have a strong idea that just falls flat. The execution just isn't there. I mean, there's a lot of execution, but not the execution cinematically in this film. Also, a lot of this movie is cops talking or mobsters talking. I want more Punisher. In my favorite moment of the movie, maybe any movie ever, the mobster's kid gets tossed across the room. There is this weird circus-themed strip club that gets shot up. Then there's a shootout at Coney Island, which is actually pretty cool. Listening to the music in the film, I kind of get a Mad Max vibe, which then dates this film to the 70s, which kind of weirdly makes sense in a way. The subtle racism of the film becomes less subtle as the film goes on. The Italians are bad, but they have their limits. The Japanese, they're so super evil, they'll do anything to control drugs or whatever it is evil mobsters do. Anything. It reminds me of the depiction of the Japanese during World War II, and it's very unfortunate that it happens in a movie from 1989. That said, Lady Tanaka is probably the best non-Louis Gossett Jr. thing about this movie. She's a bit hammy and over the top, and it's probably a bit of a racist depiction, but it's also very comic booky. Maybe for those reasons? I do wish they'd call her crew the Hand. They don't. After freeing most of the kids with a bus, plot point, one kid is still captured. Remember that. Punisher gives himself up. Louis Gossett Jr. kills it in the scene with a lump of Dolph Lundgren. He's really amazing. He's similar to Ronnie Cox in Captain America, a great actor kind of slumming it, but not just going through the motion, giving it their all, or they're just so good that they don't even have to try. I love you, Dolph. I truly do. Just not as the Punisher.
But you gotta talk to me, man. Let me in! Let me in! My family too, right? They were my family too. Now let me in, goddamn. Let me in!
In a totally non-cliche scene, they are transferring Punisher when his armored car gets attacked. In a decent twist, it turns out it's the Italians. So the big team up is the annoying mob guy and Punisher to save the remaining plot point. Throw that kid across the room. I just realized that Punisher is always covered in dust and never has his iconic skull, other than some super cool knives. Why not use some of that dust to have some skull action going on here in his chest? The movie doesn't do that. Punisher drops his gun when he's done with them as he and mob guy shoot their way to the Japanese lady. Punisher throws a knife in her head. Awesome. Wait, it isn't a skull knife? Not awesome. Also, Dad, if you're watching, at least Mom, tell Dad, can you ask him if he can carve a skull in this? Punisher and mob guy have the lamest fight of the movie, and the kid goes road to perdition and threatens to kill the Punisher. Punisher tells the boy to be a good man or he'll kill him.
Come on. Do it. Do it.
The movie ends with another speech and more Punisher silhouette nudity. Watching it again, I really liked it. It's obviously a bad movie, but it has the ambition at some points to be a good movie, or at least a not terrible movie. At Cannes the following year, they announced a Punisher sequel and a She-Hulk movie starring Brigitte Nielsen, and a pilot for the Power Pack. The comic you always see in the bargain bins but never buy, you should buy it. Also, they actually made that pilot. It's the only thing that got made out of those three. It never went anywhere, but it went further than the other two. At the time, I only read Power Pack issues that were part of the Inferno crossover of the X-Men. Believe it or not, they actually filmed it, but didn't sell the thing. I wonder why. Now, we all know that Punisher 2 never happened, and She-Hulk certainly didn't happen. Otherwise, I'd be doing 3 more reviews of Marvel movies. But as of right now, I only have 1 more early 90s Marvel movie to look at. And finally, Roger Corman's Fantastic Four and the whole crazy story behind the scenes. Do you know where Warner Brothers Discovery got the whole idea for the let's not release Batgirl as a tax write-off thing? Roger Corman. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Stan Lee was pounding the pavement in Hollywood on behalf of Marvel. He desperately wanted people to take comic books seriously. This film is not what he had in mind. Stan was relatively successful at this in the late 1970s. Doctor Strange got a TV movie, Spider-Man got an entire season, and Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno became cultural icons with the Incredible Hulk. The Marvel TV universe? Marvel telematic universe?
No, Dad.
The Marvel Network TV universe wasn't a huge success. Okay, Hulk, you were a success, and maybe a big enough one that the 80s seemed like it was going to be the Marvel decade. Which it may have been if it wasn't for the company constantly being bought and sold, and Marvel optioning their own characters every other Saturday. Before I truly begin, I want to thank 2 key sources for this video. First, Sean Howe's Marvel Comics The Untold Story, and Dune, The Untold Story of Roger Corman's Fantastic Four. Virtually every bit of information, outside of my own personal experiences and recollections, come from those 2 sources. Finally, after 2 previous video retrospectives, the early 90s Marvel Cinematic Universe concludes with the still unreleased Fantastic Four. In the early 1980s, Sterling Sillivan of In the Heat of the Night fame completed a draft for a Daredevil pilot for ABC. Tom Selleck was rumored as Doctor Strange. The mustache that kept him from being Indiana Jones almost made him Doctor Strange. Okay, it was Magnum PI that kept him from being Indy, which indirectly does mean the mustache did prevent him from being Indiana Jones. Carl Weathers was interested in being Power Man. He also famously has a mustache. Maybe he could have been Doctor Strange. He has made what one could consider a witch's brew.
You take this home, throw it in a pot, add some broth, a potato. Baby, you got a stew going.
Disaster film maestro Irwin Allen was interested in a Human Torch film. He probably would have just burned down a building, so it would have been awesome. Roger Corman took out an option for Spider-Man. The X-Men film rights belonged to a Canadian production company. They should have acquired the rights to Alpha Flight. And finally, a Fantastic Four film was placed in turnaround by CBS Theatrical Films. Obviously, nothing came of any of it, save some animation and Incredible Hulk TV movies. The Marvel cinematic and television landscape was a bleak place. Hulk did have Thor and Daredevil, which I also played as I portrayed that version of Daredevil because I had a black sweatsuit and a ski mask. For some reason, I fought Captain America, also wearing mostly black sweats. I also played Kingpin. I personally loved that portrayal of Daredevil, and at the time, didn't know any better, so I liked Thor. I was wrong. I still like that Daredevil though. Stan Lee's excursion to Hollywood championing the mighty Marvel brand was largely a failure, after several more purchases and acquisitions from corporate overlords. Enter toy genius Avi Arad. In the early 1990s, the X-Men cartoon was killing it, and will be again soon. My friend Sam, who actually did the avatar art you see on this channel, is a storyboard artist on the upcoming X-Men cartoon. Go Sam. James Cameron submitted pages for his Spider-Man feature. Jim got $3 million for those pages. And he saved it up to make 1/8 of 1 second of the next Avatar movie. Wesley Snipes was ready to play Black Panther, Wes Craven was going to direct Doctor Strange, and 20th Century Fox was doing a live-action X-Men film. Most of those things never happened, but those are big names attached to those projects. Snipes would later become famous for his portrayal of Marvel's Blade, and the Fox X-Men movies continued, until another mega merger ended them, kinda sorta. Not sure what's going on with the next Deadpool movie. But there was one other Marvel project in the works. Roger Corman's Fantastic Four. It's a cheap film from a filmmaker known for making cheap films. And cheap is probably being generous here, and I do not mean it in an insulting way. Unlike Stan Lee, who had kind of been selling the rights to basically anyone, Arad wanted the marquee names. The big studios, high quality and lots of money. Watch my Iron Man video for some examples of big names that were almost Iron Man. Arad felt it would harm the brand, and he actually paid to have the film destroyed, supposedly. Maybe it's buried in the desert somewhere near copies of E.T. for the Atari 2600. Regardless, enter that little boy with the mushroom haircut. Me. In the early 1990s, I had 5 subscriptions. 1. The Star Wars Insider. 2. Green Lantern. 3. Uncanny X-Men. 4. The Amazing Spider-Man. 5. Wizard, The Guide to Comics. I should add that I didn't have them all at the same time. I remember when I shared this, Judy was like, whoa, you had 5 subscriptions, but there was overlap, but maybe I had 2 at a time. I'm not sure, possibly 3. I did have Wizard for 2 years because I signed up for the 2-year plan, so I had that one for quite a long time. That was a glorious time. Wizard, The Guide to Comics is a sad dead thing now. But to a comic book loving kid in the early 1990s, it was the Bible. Among other things, Wizard magazine made comics creators superstars. You could probably draw a line from that rock starification of the comics creators to the growth of Image and the implosion of the market in the 1990s. Regardless, it was a big deal for me. From the hilarious letters section, I once actually sent a letter with a picture of Strong Guy on it to the letters section. It did not get published, and it was pretty terrible. From that to the questionable price guide, to the casting call, giving hypothetical or dream cast for comic book movies, I poured through every page of every issue. I'd even cut parts out and glue them into my notebooks, which became this, comic collage. I don't really do it so much anymore, cutting up old comic books to make collage art, but if you're subscribed to this channel and you want one, comment below and I'll send you one. And I'm serious, kind of no strings attached on this. I just kind of want to get rid of the box that I have left. Maybe I'll make more after that. Each issue also had a few pages dedicated to movie news or TV news or whatever comic books and other media news, including real images of the Fantastic Four movie, including a real life thing. The movie was never released and it was never totally clear why, and even today there's a whole lot of conjecture as to why it was truly shelved. Check out my previously mentioned sources for more specifics on that. In the fall of 1992, producer Bernd Eichinger had a $250,000 option on the Fantastic Four that was expiring at the end of the year. He approached F movie makers Troma. They turned it down, not wanting to alienate their fans and their buddy Stan Lee. It then went to Roger Corman, who apparently turns nothing down.
I'm willing to do almost anything.
Welcome to the book nook in our new house. Some key details I should add before we move on. Eichinger bought the rights in 1986 for the aforementioned $250,000. Eichinger couldn't find a studio partner to fund his script, which was budgeted at $30 million. The rights were set to expire December 31st, 1992, unless production began by the end of the year.
And cut. Cut it. Very nice. That's a wrap.
He then took the script with an actual budget of $1 million to Roger Corman, although some reports put that budget at $2 million, and production began December 28th of that year. The team at Corman's New Horizons was shocked that the script was theirs. They assumed it must belong to some big studio. However, they were hopeful with it being a co-production. That meant more money and money actually going into the production of the film, and not other places. And a major theatrical release, or so they thought. On December 1st, 1992, Mark Ruffalo auditioned for the film. He didn't get the part. I wonder what happened to that guy.
3 pimples you have, zap. Fight once you don't, zap. Double zap.
Okay, sorry different Hulk. I'm just angering Hulks all over with this video. But now, let's fulfill 11-year-old Josiah's dream. To watch this movie and break his mushroom haircut heart. The film opens with Victor and Reed in college. They experiment. It doesn't work. Victor seems to die. The opening scene is probably the best part of the movie, and it works really well. It's very dramatic and well executed. Things will not go as well from here on out. The effects in this scene also hold up shockingly well. I totally missed that obvious joke opportunity, which is probably a good thing because it's pretty extremely, maybe overly obvious. Right in my wheelhouse. Again, the rest of the effects will not hold up, even by 1994 standards, let alone 2022 or 2038 when adult Penny and Prim are rewatching this.
My dad.
Reed and his buddy Ben leave Mrs. Storm's boarding house, saying goodbye to Susan and Johnny. If you look, you'll see that he totally did not hit her with the door, and it was in my script but didn't end up in the final version for some reason. I don't know if I didn't record it, or if I did a bad take, or if I just thought it wasn't that funny to point out, but I'm pointing it out now. Actual children, Susan and Johnny, are actual kids.
Aren't you coming with us, Reed?
Sue clearly has a thing for Reed. It's meant to be sweet.
You okay?
But it doesn't quite come off as such. It wants to be sweet and it isn't. Fortunately, it doesn't quite cross that line into the creepy either. But I would say it's definitely not sweet. Ben and little Johnny are best pals.
It's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair.
Hey, take it easy.
Very unlike them.
It's not the end of the world.
Flash forward 10 years. Victor is now Dr. Doom, always lurking in the shadows, watching Reed and the gang. Scientist Reed and pilot Ben return to the boarding house.
Johnny and Susan go to outer space with us
for their dangerous space mission. Why?
Because that's right.
Before the dangerous space flight, we meet the jeweler. As goofy as his character is, it actually kind of works. He's in love with Alicia Masters, who is in love with Ben, even though they only met once. But sometimes, that's all it takes. But will she still love him when he hulks? I actually wrote a joke about him thinging out, and I wasn't thinking of it in any inappropriate way, but it very much sounded very inappropriate, so I took that joke out. The jeweler is basically the mole man, who was in the early scripts. However, the license from Marvel was limited and apparently could only use core Fantastic Four characters. Hence, the jeweler who lives with a group of Morlocks under the ground. Totally not the mole man. The jeweler is after some diamonds the Fantastic Four need to diffuse heat in their ship. Or something like that. Anyway, his stealing of the jewels is what dooms their space voyage.
Doom.
By the way, Doom, who has cameras in Reed's Lost in Space laboratory, is allowing this all to happen because he wants to watch Reed fail. Cheap, ill-fitting suits, and it's 100% unclear what is happening as their mission becomes Thrift Store Interstellar.
It's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair.
Hey, take it easy. It's not the end of the world.
Aren't you coming with us, Reed?
You okay? Johnny and Susan go to outer space with us?
Ben, this is crazy. What do they know about astrophysics?
Hello, Reed. The Fantastic Four.
Hello. This is a little device I've been playing. I hope for your sake it's working well. I have the diamond and a friend of Mr. Grimm. Oh, by the way, that laser you saw, it's finished now. Allow me to demonstrate its purpose. You have 12 hours to surrender yourselves to me, or I'll wipe out New York City.
I had so many versions of these Interstellar jokes that I actually put up different videos separately of it, which you can find below. I don't know why, I just got really carried away editing Interstellar meets Fantastic Four for some reason once it got in my head. And that's not an insult, but a compliment. The music swells here. It did its best to save this movie.
Goodbye, Dr. Richards.
Don't let me leave.
All because the composers, the unfortunately named Worst Brothers, paid for an orchestra themselves.
More like Best Brothers.
The film was shot fast and dirty in Corman's studio in Venice, a condemned warehouse. As in, it was actually condemned by the fire marshal. The crew apparently kept the condemned sign on the door of the editing bay. The sets were actually recycled from Corman's Jurassic Park ripoff, Carnosaur.
That's really fabulous.
Stan Lee talked the film down at Comic-Con, saying it was the last film that the lawyers sold the rights to, and that Marvel wasn't creatively involved. He did, however, visit the set, going as far as to bring the donuts one day.
How many times did you visit the set of our film, Stan? You have a nice time? He brought the donuts once.
No wonder they call it Hell's Kitchen.
After wrapping the shoot, director Oli Sassoon and editor Glenn Garland were on to other projects. They continued to work on Fantastic Four after hours, having reels snuck out to them. All of their pickups were shot on the sly with borrowed equipment, and the visual effects, they were an absolute mess.
Blame on!
The first special effects house seriously oversold their abilities, and the film didn't hold up. Another firm, Mr. Film, did their best with little time and littler money. Is it littler?
No, Daddy. No, Daddy.
The film was smartly made as the filmmakers tried to minimize these limitations. However, the limitations are still kinda glaring. It is a Fantastic Four movie after all. These limitations show up halfway through the film when a post-crash team ends up in a lab. It turns out they're captives of Dr. Doom. Their powers show up, but are hidden by only being shown in brief snippets and cutaways. But maybe not brief enough. The team battles their way out, and it's wave after wave of cartoon henchmen. It's very much Ned Beatty from Superman's School of Comic Relief Henchmen. And it hurts what is somewhat a serious movie. If not serious, certainly not overly comedic. The same way Ned Beatty kind of ruined Superman? Is that a hot take?
Blame on!
The team is back in New York and Thing is angry.
You cannot live normal lives.
These sections are very true to very early Fantastic Four comics.
I'm known as a freak, isn't it right, buddy?
Sue makes comics accurate costumes that would impress as homemade cosplay, but don't hold up as feature film costumes. That said, they're the best film costumes the Fantastic Four have ever worn. Even Thing's Speedo is included. The film ends with an attempted bang. That's probably not the best phrasing. Thing rescues Alicia from the jeweler. Reminder, the jeweler was in love with her and kidnapped her. If I didn't mention that, I probably mentioned at least part of that. Doom shows up to steal the diamonds and double kidnaps her. The now costumed Fantastic Four return to Doom's castle and basically have the same battle as before. But again, now in costume. Reed and Doom duke it out. I should also stop right here to mention the best part of the film.
And the smartest man alive, Reed Richards.
Alex Hyde White is wonderful. He was born to be Reed Richards, and this is the best portrayal of the character ever. I love you, Jim, but we need more than 12 seconds of screen time before you and all of your friends get brutally murdered. The rest of the cast are various levels of not so great, from cute Sue, who isn't terrible, but isn't great, to an awful Johnny, who's great in other things, like Uncle Buck, to an over-the-top but enjoyable Doom. It's all kinda like the Thing's costume. Kid me was blown away, and the expression in the animatronics is impressive. However, it still just somehow does not work. And frankly, that is this movie. It just doesn't work. After I posted about this video, a friend messaged me saying, hey, for one single day in the 90s, I worked on that Fantastic Four movie. 12-year-old Josiah is thrilled to know he now has a direct link to the unreleased, almost ethereal, mystical, legendary Roger Corman's Fantastic Four film. And 41-year-old Josiah is just as thrilled. The film ends with a thoroughly disappointing Reed Doom battle. The fight isn't great, but the idea of it is. It must come down to these two men. As goofy as Doom is, actor Joseph Culp was emulating the garish absurdity of Benito Mussolini. He is among the best this bad film has to offer, when you can understand what he's saying. Which you can't understand most of what he's saying.
He's speaking.
Because they either chose not or couldn't re-record his mask-muffled voice.
Insurance.
He, like much of the rest of the film, is earnest. It fails, but it fails in love with what it's trying to do. It's a romance you're not quite ready for. You're too young, you're too foolish, but it's worth the failure a million times over. The end, however, is bad. Horrible with terrible special effects as Johnny tries to stop a death ray headed for New York. New Horizon and Roger Corman said nothing, as the film, it just seemed to be in limbo. So the cast, they took matters into their own hands. In July of 1993, at the LA Comic-Con, then held at the Shrine. Virtually on the campus of my alma mater, USC, people lined up to watch the trailer. The cast toured conventions, including San Diego Comic-Con in 1993, bringing the entire crew and the Thing Head. Pictures showed up in publications such as Wizard, where, as I mentioned, I saw it. The film's guerrilla press was gaining them some momentum. The cast and crew planned a premiere at the Mall of America in Minnesota. In 1994, that place was a big deal. The premiere was halted, as the cast and crew received a cease and desist on all promotion. Michael Bailey Smith, who played Ben Grimm, personally spent $12,000 on promotion. He has no regrets, and he shouldn't. But the promotion, like the film, was all a bust. The film could never be more than that. It was never allowed to be, and it was never meant to be. Future me again, or is it present me, or since you're watching this, it's all past me. Eichinger then handed Corman a check to purchase the movie, which Corman said was for $1 million. So Eichinger essentially paid $2,250,000 for the rights to produce the later, very forgettable mid-2000s Fantastic Four movies. And that's not including any other cost of development he had along the way. He had to pay for people to write that script. It was a result of a deal made before the days of Avi Arad, a deal they regretted. The filmmakers made a sincere effort, the aforementioned love. They loved this project, and as with most bad movies, the story behind the scenes is far more interesting than the movie itself. The Disaster Artist was nominated for an Oscar, but people throw spoons during screenings of The Room. Chris Columbus was interested in the property. This was 1993. Mrs. Doubtfire was a huge hit. Fox wanted the film for Columbus, who would eventually be named as a producer on the 2005 film that did get made. In October of 1993, Arad had sold the X-Men film rights to Fox. A deal that seemed like a good one at the time, but until recently haunted Disney and Marvel for years. A Fantastic Four deal was imminent. It was rumored Eichinger used the completed bad film as leverage to get more cash.
What kind of a thing have I turned into? What have you done? What have you done?
The deal was struck with Fox, and Arad took the negative from Corman. Ali Sassoon and Glenn Garland tried to retrieve it, but it was too late. The film was gone. Arad, he said he had the film burned.
Be glad to help with the demolition.
Somehow, copies got out. Sassoon believes that it was the Dub House. Noticing that it was a Fantastic Four film, they basically made a copy for themselves, who made a copy for a friend, and shared it with a friend, and shared it with a friend, and shared it with a friend.
And so on, and so on, and so on.
The film was never released, but those copies were put on VHS and later DVD, and duplicated over and over and over again and sold at conventions and on eBay for years. The film may have never been meant to be released, but it found its way to the people to whom it matters the most.
Us.
No, not you. Me. Well, people like me. Us fans.
We're fans. We're fans.
It's fitting the film itself ends with a wedding. A wedding is a celebration of two people becoming one, of people coming together to be something more. Some marriages fail, some people fall out of love. However, that wedding, that's a moment of hope. Pure hope. Hope of a future where this Fantastic Four movie was released, and my 1994 became magical. Wait, why is Reed in his costume but Sue in a wedding dress? I know that's what they would do in the comics, but still. Maybe it's best this film wasn't released. Turns out, that's a better story. Did you notice Stan Lee's first on-camera cameo in the trial of the Incredible Hulk? So that wraps up my Marvel trilogy. Thank you so much for watching and supporting me if you do. I really do love these three movies, and so much so that I wanted to cover all three, and so much so that I wanted to do a special presentation when I brought them all together. That was always my original plan, to do the three individual videos and this one big video, but I really do love these movies, and even when I'm making fun of them, it's purely out of a place of love, and I hope it's never mean-spirited and never insulting to the filmmakers, because I'm well aware of their limitations. am well aware of the struggles to make any film, even a silly little YouTube video. This is a lot of effort for me to do this, especially with little people, and I really appreciate the creators of these works, because good and bad and in between, they meant a lot to me and still do. So thank you to the filmmakers, thank you for everyone who's ever watched this channel, and hopefully I will be making more content about very bad movies and very good comic books and other stuff very soon. Thanks for watching.